organism. So for herbicides, that would be a plant. Some of them are broad spectrum, so they might kill any plant that they touch or damage it somehow. Same thing with insecticides. So with insecticides, where I have more of my experience, pyrethroids is one. There are organophosphates, which have been around for a really long time. Organochlorines, which we don't have as much of anymore. They're very toxic in the environment. DDT is one of those. And then pyrethroids, which we'll talk about in a little bit. There's neonicotinoids. That's another large group of commonly used insecticides in both agriculture and urban.
Is that related to nicotine?
It is neonicotinoid, so the oid is like something, so it is based off of a nicotine compound. Nicotine actually has insecticidal properties, and it has been used for hundreds of years.
And our previous speaker from the Water Board was actually talking about how pyrethins or pyrethroids are from a natural derivative.
Right.
Are many of these actually from nature, or?
Yeah, a lot of them are derivatives of something that actually occurs in nature. And there are naturally occurring compounds like sulfur. Sulfur is a widely used pesticide that's been used for hundreds of years. And it's an element, it's natural. There are other pesticides that are based on essential oils, and even baking soda can be a component, castor oil, various plant oils, cinnamon oil. So there are many of these that are naturally occurring with pesticidal properties. And then the ones that have been synthesized over the years, they've just been formulated to be more specific or to target a certain group of pests.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, if you have a certain crop problem or issue, then you're going to talk to probably an advisor, and he or she will tell you what is the best product to use to address that.
Right.
Now, the regulations, again, speaking broadly, I know we're going to hone in a little bit, but obviously there's regulations that deal with pesticides and how they're used, how they're applied, even how they're stored. What entities, both federal and state, really oversee this?
So pesticide regulations are federally, the EPA is involved in the registration, re-registration, canceling of pesticides. And within the federal laws, there are specifically some acts that have to go with pesticides. So there's the Federal Insecticide, Rodenticide, Fungicide Act. It's called FIFRA. And then there's the Food Quality Protection Act. And so there's all of these acts that kind of hone in on specific regulations and meeting daily limits for residues. In California, we have other entities that are involved in regulations. So there's the big one, the California Department of Pesticide Regulation. They will register pesticides to be legally allowable in California. Unless they're exempt, and that might be another question.
Right.
But there's also regulations by the State Water Resource Control Board, the California Department of Public Health, and the Agricultural Commissioner. So there's a lot of levels of regulations depending on who you are, where you're applying it, and what you might be doing.
Yeah. Well, I guess it depends on what the issue is and who they're trying to protect or what they're trying to protect. Like,
correct.
If it's worker safety, then I imagine that's coming from one direction of the regulatory world, maybe OSHA.
Yeah. So OSHA's involved, OEHA, which is the Occupational Environmental something, I can't remember, but there are lots of different groups, and they do all focus on a certain aspect of worker protection or environmental protection, water quality, soil quality, air quality. So we've got the Air Quality Resource Control Board. I mean, there's a lot of regulation, and it's really just to keep our environment safe and ourselves safe.
Okay, so there's a lot of things to track when you're either using a pesticide or overseeing the use. Last program we were talking about municipalities, and now they're having to get involved. So a lot of different regulations to consider then.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so are the regulations then different? It sounds like that they are they
Yeah.
different for farmers than for the public? And if so, how does that work out?
So there are different regulations for farmers or growers and other people who apply pesticides. So if you are a grower that is applying pesticides yourself, you need to be licensed by the California Department of Pesticide Regulation in order to legally apply them. And then you have to report your applications through your county agricultural commissioner, which then goes to DPR. If you are a structural pest control professional, somebody who sprays around buildings, homes, structures, they are licensed by the California State Structural Pest Control Board, which is housed in the Department of Consumer Affairs. And so they have other regulations, they have lots of requirements, and then they report to that entity, but that information gets taken up by DPR as well. Okay. So if you are applying a pesticide for hire or as part of your work, you are likely needing to be licensed, and California has, I think, a dozen or so different license types depending on who you are and how you're doing it. There are some ways that you might apply a pesticide, like if you work in an apartment building and you're just doing some routine pest control that you don't have to be applied if you're not using a restricted
spraying
material.
Ants or spraying some Roundup ants or something.
Right, just incidental and a non-restricted pesticide, so things that you might be able to get off the shelf.
Okay.
For the general public does not need to be licensed in order to apply pesticides. So I brought some empty containers here that any resident can get off the shelf and apply. And so the general public doesn't need to be licensed, but other people do if they're using it as part of work or to produce food or feed.
So the rule of thumb is if that is what you're hired to do, and that's apply pesticides, very likely you're going to need to register with the county ag?
Yeah, so you register, you take a licensing exam with the California Department of Pesticide Regulation, and then you may or may not need to register with your county ag department depending on what your license type is, but most often you would. And then you have to get annual continuing education classes and units to maintain your knowledge and to maintain your license.
So this class could almost count as continuing education for an applicator.
Yeah, if you applied for units.
All right, well, very good. We may get some applicators watch our class.
Okay, great.
All right, so we've all heard of historic pesticides like DDT, and they've been prohibited for some time. What made the determination to prohibit some of those, and how does that process work? There's others that are in the stormwater world talked about a lot, diazinon and chloropyrifos. Can you give us a little background on these historic, maybe infamous pesticides?
Well, DDT is a good example of one that is well known and historic. So DDT came out in the early 1930s or so, and it was really effective on lots of different pests. But some pests started to grow resistance to it, but also they were finding that it was really long-standing in its ability. It's a fat-soluble product, so it stays in the body and it stays in animals, and it also bioaccumulates. So if a predator eats something that had exposure to DDT, that predator now has it, and if that predator has other they were finding it in mother's milk in our bodies. And so with lots of environmental changes around the 1970s, people started to really look at DDT as a chemical that was just too toxic in the environment to justify its use. And so the United States banned it in 1972, and other countries have followed suit. But
Same
it is
year
still
the Clean Water Act came out.
Yeah, and so DDT was one of the chemicals that kind of drove that movement, if you will, and lots of different regulations. Yeah.
Well, and two that are spoken of a lot in this part of California anyways with the delta is diazinon and chloropyrifos.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit, what are these two pesticides and maybe why were they prohibited?
So diazinon and chlorpyrifos are part of an insecticide group called organophosphates, and they are broadly toxic to insects, and so they don't just target the one pest that you might want to control. They may kill the beneficials, but they also get into stormwater and other waterways, and they are toxic to the aquatic organisms. So there's a couple indicator species in our waterways, Cerodaphnia, which is a little water flea, and Hylela azteca, another aquatic organism. And those, the finding in the waterways was that these chemicals through runoff, both agriculture and urban runoff, were killing these aquatic organisms, which are part of the food chain, and they're studied as an indication of healthy water. And so finding out that these were the main sources of the low populations in the water, California decided to eliminate the use for home use for the unlicensed folks to have access to diazinon and chlorpyrifos in the early 2000s. Diazinon, I believe, no, it's still available for certain crops and agriculture, but it's a restricted material. You have to apply for a permit to use it. And chlorpyrifos is still used, also restricted use, and California is looking into banning the use of that, but that's ongoing right now, and that's all I know.
Well, with all these pesticides, historic pesticides being eliminated or prohibited, you would think that today we're much safer. You know, in fact, one of these even says, I think it was this one, says safer brand. So today, are pesticides safe, and what is safe?
Right.
Is there still a concern about applying pesticides?
Yeah, so a couple questions in there. There's still a concern about applying pesticide, any pesticide at all. We have to remember that they are chemicals and that they are used to kill something, hopefully what we're targeting, and not just, spreading it out. But the brand Safer is just the name of their brand. It doesn't necessarily mean the products are safe in all cases. So everything that's used as a pesticide has some sort of toxicity, which is why it's applied. So I would say we are getting more of the lesser toxic materials on the market than we have had before that are more targeted towards the pest. But some are still very broadly toxic. This is a well-known brand, and it has a different active ingredient now than it used to have before, which is a concern when people don't always read the label. But they vary in their level of toxicity, so it's just really important when using a pesticide to understand how to apply it in a manner that's going to be effective against your pest, but that you also protect yourself.
Well, maybe it's just public perception, but it seems like more and more now stories are coming out in the news that such and such a chemical is not as safe as we thought it was. One I'm thinking of is Roundup. There's been many, many stories about Roundup. And of course that's a trade name for
glyphosate.
Yes.
The active ingredient.
But now there's more and more stories. So where the public thought it was safe, now I guess more data is coming out, more studies, it's been out longer, so we're seeing long-term health effects. Is that a reality in the pesticide field? Do we learn more as we go?
Yeah, when the pyrethroids came on the market, they were thought to be the next best thing. But then through studies of the different environmental impacts and health, they found that it's actually more toxic to fish than they had once thought, and the aquatic organisms. So we as in university and various regulatory agencies and researchers are constantly doing research on various aspects of toxicology and safety in the environment, and we don't have all the data for all the chemicals on the chronic or long-term toxicity for many of the chemicals that are out on the market, whether they be pesticides or other things. So what we do know is the acute toxicity, so the immediate, you got it on your skin or in your eyes, because that's easier to study. But the chronic effects of pesticides or different chemicals. It takes a lot longer to study, and there's, just kind of ongoing research.
I imagine there's so many factors that could be
there,
and I imagine different people have different sensitivities too.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so someone can be ultra sensitive to a certain chemical.
Right.
So,
that's true.
Okay, in the last hour, Danny McClure with the regional board talked about the pyrethroids. Now, first off, that is a category, right?
Yes.
That there are, I understand, several, if 5, 6, 8 types of pyrethroids that go under different names.
Yeah, so pyrethroids is a group of insecticides. And so, as you mentioned before, pyrethrin or pyrethrum is a naturally derived product from certain chrysanthemum flowers. So it is, a more natural product that has
Sounds
pesticide
healthy. It's from flowers.
It's from flowers,
Yeah.
right? But pyrethroid, and this goes back to the neonicotinoid and the oid. The oid is something that's like something else. And so a pyrethroid is like pyrethrin or pyrethrum, kind of interchangeable terms. But they're synthesized. So they're synthesized to act like the pyrethrum, but they're actually not from natural sources anymore because they're synthetic. And they are actually more broadly toxic than pyrethrum and toxic to aquatic organisms. So within the pyrethroid group, the active ingredients that fall under that don't say pyrethroid, they say permethrin, resmethrin, and so I brought a number of them today. This is deltamethrin, this is zeta-cypermethrin, I think this is permethrin.
This is pyrethrins.
Yeah, so that's pyrethrin. So this is the derived from chrysanthemum, and the rest of these are the pyrethroids.
That's why it's safer, because it is the pyrethrin.
Yep. But so there's a number of the active ingredients that end in thrin for the pyrethroids, but pyrethrin is the one that is the chrysanthemum one, and all the other thrins are pyrethroids. It's confusing.
Yeah.
And I always say, whoever allowed the manufacturers to end it with thrin, it gives the false sense of, oh, this is the natural stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's one that doesn't follow the thrin. It's S-phenvalerate. So all the pyrethroids are thrins, except pyrethrin. Yeah, it's very confusing.
So Danny said that one of the reasons why the people were using them was they weren't as long acting. That they had I guess he called it a half-life, a much shorter half-life. Does that help with the toxicology or the toxicity, I should say, of the chemical?
Yeah, so pyrethroids are longer acting than pyrethrin, but the pyrethroids aren't as long lasting as, say, the organophosphates or organochlorines, but they do bind to the soil instead of being soluble in water, and so they fall into the sediment in the creeks and the rivers. And I'm not a water quality or a toxicology expert, but in general, they are there for longer, and if they're in the water, they may not have sunlight to break them down as fast. And so there's other factors, not just if you put this pesticide out in the sun and it's going to break down through regular, photodegradation
or something, yeah.
Right, then, it's sitting for longer because it has been in the sediment. And so the properties still last longer. And so there's just a lot we learn the more studies that we do.
Okay. So today there's the big emphasis about organic produce. I know my wife wants us to buy organic, eat organic. Is that just clever marketing, or is there something real to this? What is the threat when it comes to pesticides, even in our food we eat?
Right. So there's both clever marketing and some realness to it. So there are national organic standards for produce that's run by the USDA on what can be called organic as far as our food. But what the term organic has been misunderstood in at least the general public. People think of that as pesticide free. And organic does not mean pesticide free. It can if a grower or you in your backyard choose not to use pesticide, then you can do things organically. But there are a whole number of organically acceptable pesticides on the market. So pyrethroid is one of them because it's naturally derived. And so there's all these standards that something that is going to call itself organic has to fall under the classifications of what the term organic means if they're going to label their product or their food as organic. There's all the standards. So organic does not mean pesticide free, but there are many organically acceptable pesticides on the market that can be pretty effective. So what I mentioned earlier were a lot of the oils, the natural plant oils, some of the fatty acid soaps, which there are herbicides that have fatty acids that are organically acceptable.
That's what you call the insecticidal soap?
The insecticidal soap is, it has fungicidal properties, many of them, insecticidal properties, mitocidal, but there are herbicidal soaps as well. And so these are following the organically acceptable standards, and they can call themselves organic. So when you buy that organic apple, doesn't mean no pesticides. It may mean organically acceptable pesticides. But you go to a farmer's market and many of the vendors will say, we don't use pesticides. So that's pesticide free. And then what you do in your backyard is up to you. But I do tell people as well, if they're going to mix up a little dish soap with water and then go spray it in the backyard, they have now made a pesticide. And it may not be organic depending on what kind of dish soap you use. So it's a convoluted term that is misunderstood.
Yes. So how can urban communities then, you talked about the homeowner mixing up their soap and applying it to their tomatoes or whatever. How can the urban communities incorporate then in what I think is called integrated pest management?
Yeah.
I guess define that term for us first.
Yeah, so integrated pest management is a strategy that has been around for several decades now, that really just incorporates other ways of managing pests that may not necessarily be pesticides first. A lot of people's knee-jerk reaction is to grab the can of something to spray the ants. But integrated pest management involves a lot of different controls. We call them cultural control, physical control, biological control, and chemical control. And what that is try, caulking up the area where the ants are coming into the house, or pulling out the weeds by hand or with a hoe or some sort of tool. You can use steam for killing the weeds instead of applying a pesticide in parks and sidewalks and such. You can hand pick the bugs off of your plant in the backyard. You can feed the snails to the chickens or the geese. So there's lots of different methods that help us control pests without going to the pesticides first. But integrated pest management is not, we don't use the term organic necessarily. We say it's a strategy that uses various methods and tools to arrive at the level of pest that you're comfortable with. And in agriculture, there is an economic threshold. When you have this many aphids, you need to do something about it, or else huge infestation, crop loss. In the home and in the landscape, what is the economic threshold? That looks really bad because there's a bunch of weeds on the sidewalk. Or I have ants in my kitchen and I can't have it. Or there's mosquitoes, health problems, right? So what is a pest and how you're going to find the level of economic value is really up to the user. And it could be aesthetic, and it could be health, and it could be economic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you gave some tips, but let's go back to weed control. I know that's near and dear to many people, and especially now with all these stories coming out about possible links to cancer with Roundup or other similar products. I know there's a lot of concern.
Yep.
I know my wife banned it from our place.
Yeah.
And we've been using different techniques, and you know what? This is my second year maintaining our crushed gravel driveway, and there's been a few times that weeds have gotten a little more than I wanted, but it hasn't taken over.
Yeah.
So what are some effective ways to control weeds Let's talk to two groups. Let's talk to the resident, but also we have in our audience a lot of municipalities.
Yeah.
In fact, they're going to be mandated in this next permit and with these new pyrethroid regulations to integrate IPM as one of their management practices. So what can be done about weeds?
Yeah, so in the home or in a residential backyard, front yard situation, we do usually say most weeds can be pulled out by hand. It's easier to get them when they're young and the ground is soft to pull them out by hand. There's so many different tools. There are various hand tools that have good grips. There's long-handled tools. There's short-handled tools. My husband uses what looks like little dental tools for the sidewalk cracks and just keeps in those because we don't want to spray chemicals because then you have dead weeds in the cracks. So just scrape them out. And then you can fill up cracks with like a caulk filler or a crack filler, kind of sealant to keep the weeds out. But, in general, there are so many different hand tools and, depending if you have a field, you can use goats to come and eat the weeds. I mentioned earlier steam weeding, which isn't really applicable to a residential backyard situation. They have these flame weeders as well that you can use.
This year we bought one of those.
Yeah.
Propane torch.
Yeah, and how'd it work?
It worked pretty good. It burned them off immediately, obviously, but they do grow back.
They do. And so the other thing is we do a lot of education on identifying your pest because even though it's a weed, not all weeds have the same root structure. Some of them will just grow back. Some of them, if you burn them, you've killed the thing because they have a shallow root system or they were young enough. Mallows are really hard to kill even with pesticides. So, there's different strategies, but we try to educate people on identifying their weed first so that they know how it grows and can this one be pulled out by hand. You can pull out dandelion by hand, but if you leave any of the root, it just comes back. And so there's certain tools for dandelions that you get the whole or at least the majority of the taproot and then it won't grow back. So it's really not that complicated. It's just understanding a little bit about the pest, the biology of the pest, and the best ways to address it. So that's for the residential, kind of homeowner audience. For municipalities, I know that there have been a lot of questions that have come into my office and my colleagues about what can we spray instead or what can we do instead. So many of my colleagues are looking into the steam weeders. The steam machines, they use a lot of water, but they are pretty effective. Equipment can be kind of expensive, but I've heard of some cities buying one in the county and then sharing it within the city. For weed control and schools, when you're doing weed control in schools, there's separate regulations for what you can do on a school property when kids are around. So some of these different tools work really well in certain situations. My colleagues and I are actually doing some herbicide trials right now. In fact, I'm going there when I'm done today to go see how my plots are doing, using alternatives to glyphosate. So we're using some of the organic materials, the fatty acid soaps, and some things that are organically acceptable or lesser toxic that might replace glyphosate since many municipalities don't want to use that anymore.
I use some of those essential oil ones that are commercially available at like I got a Home Depot or something. It made our whole yard or whole rock driveway smell like a gumdrop, a spiced gumdrop.
Yes, there's one in particular that has cinnamon oil and clove oil, and it smells like Christmas, like times 20.
Yeah.
But you still have to be careful with these alternatives because, as I said, they are still chemicals, and some of the indicator words, which are called signal words, that indicate the acute toxicity. Some of the pesticides that are even natural are more acutely toxic if you get them on there, so on your skin or in your eyes. So a lot of people talk about vinegar. There is a few commercial products that have a 20% acetic acid, but it has a danger signal word. So it actually is very toxic if you get it on your face, on your eyes. It'll burn your hair.
Because it's an acid.
Because it's an acid, and it's
Yeah.
20%, whereas the vinegar in your kitchen is like 5 to 7%, right? And it doesn't kill your salad; you actually eat it. The 20%, you would never want to eat
Right.
it. It's very toxic, and so you actually have to wear proper personal protective equipment
Right.
when you're using even these glyphosate alternatives. And I
Yeah.
would advocate PPE anytime you're using any chemicals at all, but the required PPE will be listed on the label. But we're looking into these alternatives since so many municipalities, universities, landscapers want to move away from glyphosate.
Well, I know I was talking to a longtime, our friend, and he's a longtime pesticide person, and he said that in the day, the growers would actually use butane or propane torches to instead of the pre-emergence, and and to control their rows. And maybe those types of things are coming back. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot of integrated pest management tactics and methods, we've been using them for many years. It's just it's maybe easier, faster with labor costs to apply something that's going to be effective for many weeks or for the whole growing season, depending on your pest and its biology. So it's kind of taking a step back to look at, okay, well, we've done this, and our customers or our clients or consumers don't want these pesticides used, and so people are incorporating more IPM, both as a grower of food or feed, and also in our landscapes.
So is a lot of this battle just changing perception of we've always done it this way, this is the way we kill weeds, this is the way we kill ants? Is a lot of this just perception or the way we perceive it in our minds? Or our IPM, I guess what I'm trying to say, our IPM practices, are they compatible with chemical processes, both economically and in how they work?
Yeah, so IPM is a combination of all of those things. So there's naturally occurring biological control that will eat some of the bugs, or even there's a weevil. I just got a news report in my email today that they're going to release a weevil to eat yellow star thistle. So there's like all of these organisms that eat other organisms or parasitize, and they're out there. If we spray chemicals, we might kill the good bugs as well, or the good organisms. So integrated pest management is just, it's almost like thinking about spraying a chemical last. We don't say as a last resort, because for some pests, that's really what you need to do up front to get the infestation down. But it's thinking about alternative methods than spraying a chemical first. But certainly pesticides can be a part of an IPM plan, and everyone's going to have a different way of developing their plan, whether it's for the city, for a county, for a farm, for your home. And I don't develop an IPM plan for my home. Most residents don't, but you can still say, I'm not going to use this, and I am going to use this. But there are many people who don't want to use any weed killers at all because they think they're really bad, but then they'll go spray an insecticide on the fruit that they're going to eat in the backyard without really understanding. So there's a lot of public perception that the general public doesn't get trained on pesticides usually. And so the important thing to do is, before you're going to spray anything, read a little bit about what your pest is and what you can do. And then read the label.
Well, how can they learn? You said there were some ways they can learn.
Yes, well, we have a website, if I might turn that on. So this is the University of California statewide integrated pest management website. So it's ipm.ucanr.edu. ANR is Agriculture and Natural Resources. So you can see on this slide we have various information portals depending on who you are. So if you are in agriculture and you're growing commodity for consumption, you go to agricultural pests. But if you are in an urban setting, and that includes semi-rural, the home, garden, turf, and landscape pests, we have a lot of information on that page where you can find information about pesticides, and you can identify your pest. And there's too much for me to go to that website right now, but if someone wanted to find out more about pesticides, let's see, is this the one? No.
The one with the tape.
The one with the tape. Okay. So we do have information on our website that's linked from various areas where you can read about the biology of the pest and the damage that it causes and the season of it. And then there's all of the different control measures. So, pick up the dropped fruit so you don't have pests coming to your yard, or pull the weeds by hand. All of the biological control, proper pruning techniques. And then we get into, at the bottom of all these publications, pesticide control as an option. So we are not recommending pesticides. We are not promoting pesticides. We are presenting them as possible options, and the user will make their selection. And so we have a video on understanding pesticides and water quality. And then for some of our publications, you can actually bring up a chart, which is at the bottom there, comparing different potential hazards of a pesticide to honeybees, the beneficials that I mentioned, like parasitic wasps and predators, and to people. And we don't have all the information because not all the information exists, but we try to present it so people can make their own choices. And so we have features to help identify pests. So we have the weed photo gallery where you can learn about the weed, how it grows, how deep the taproot is, how does it spread? Does it spread by seed? Do birds pick it up and go take it elsewhere? We have training on general, very basic pesticide information and good bugs and how to identify your ants. And then we have a ton of publications that some of them are available for free. Our whole website's available for free, and you can download stuff. And then we sell books. And we do training. We do a lot of training and extending of information to get it out there.
Now, I understand if somebody goes and buys one of these products too, that, most of us guys, what we do, we just put it in the sprayer and go spray it, right?
Right.
But the label, there's more to it than just the name.
Yeah, the label's a thing. So, you find something on the shelf and you say, oh, I recognize this. I've been using it for years. And so what we try to educate folks on is to actually take the label, don't take it off, but open it before you leave the store. This is like a booklet, right? It's got a ton of information that talks about what areas or crops or situations you can use and what pests. And that's really important, not just for the efficacy of whether it's going to work against that pest, but also if you're going to be eating the fruit or the food, how long before you harvest can you use this safely without having exposure after you harvest the fruit? So there's also how should you mix it, how much to apply, precautions on your personal protective equipment, and what happens if you get poisoned. There's numbers on here. So there's a lot of information in the labels. Some of the label is just the container. There's nothing to open. And it's super small. Can you see that with your naked eye?
Not me.
Yeah, so you need a magnifying lens in some of these cases, but some things you can use indoors and some things you can't, or at least you shouldn't. People have bed bug problems and flea problems, and you need to get the right material for the right pest and the right situation. I'm on social media and I get questions all the time. I had bed bugs, I think, and everyone was telling them, spray this, do that. The person didn't know if they really had bed bugs. What if they had mosquitoes? So if you're going to spread something all over your bed and then you're going to sleep in it, so we have to be thinking about practical applications and trying to keep ourselves safe by using the right product the way it's intended, and also protecting ourselves with personal protective equipment.
Yeah. Well, good. I know we have an audience here. I'm sure they have questions, so we'll open this up to questions. Plus, if you're looking online, if you're watching this online, you can text it to the number that we've been displaying, and I will get that text. So, any questions? Anybody? How to get rid of something? or maybe alternatives.
Yes.
Does your program do any outreach on behalf of other groups?
Do we do outreach on behalf of other groups? We partner with a lot of different groups. So we have partnered with various stormwater agencies. In fact, the award you mentioned, the IPM Innovator Award, was with the Bay Area Stormwater Management Association, BASMA. We partnered with them to train a group to work in retail stores to share IPM information, both from our website but also pesticide label information. And they're still out there going. They're working with stores. They're working with their local agencies. So we do a lot of partnering, but certainly many of us are available to come and give a talk or to kind of co-sponsor an event. We have a small number of staff, so we try to maximize our capacity by training others or working with others that will then disseminate the information. So we're definitely open to it if you have ideas. Yeah, okay, great. Can talk
Yeah,
after.
and many municipalities now with these new regulations, they're actually being mandated to do outreach
Yeah,
and,
right.
On IPM techniques. And
Yeah, so we are in fact working on some online training courses that are specific to California. All of our information is specific to California. California is unique in a lot of our extra regulations and restrictions, both in agriculture and in urban settings. So we are trying to maximize our ability to extend information by doing online training courses. So I have some colleagues in Southern California who are working on kind of IPM as part of the NPDES permit.
Yeah.
And so they are working on the curriculum right now. I have not seen
that's great.
it. And then I have talked to the State Water Resource Control Board about some of the new IPM requirements, and just kind of making sure that we talk and know what's coming down and how can we help address it. We do have some online training courses right now called Urban Pesticide Mitigation, and there's 4 modules on our website, and we are updating them just with more current information, and they've been really general, so we're doing one for landscape professionals and one for structural professionals.
Well, that sounds like it'll be very useful to all these MS4s who are having to do that. They can just tap right into something that's already been created.
Yes.
In fact, I've noticed there's other groups, and I imagine they're affiliated with you somehow. UC Davis Extension, and then or Cooperative Extension, I guess is the name, and then also the Master Gardeners.
Yep.
They all work with you, or how are they associated with you?
So as I mentioned, Agriculture and Natural Resource, UC is our umbrella organization. It's part of the UC system, and even though our statewide headquarters is in Davis, we're not Davis campus. We're separate from UC Davis. But our system has statewide programs, including the statewide Master Gardener program, the statewide 4-H program. There's a food and nutrition program. There's cooperative extension, and every county has at least one UC cooperative extension office. And then there's the statewide IPM program and some others as well. So we work with the cooperative extension offices in the counties to act as a resource. So if somebody is an agronomy farm advisor and they're working on how to best grow this crop with the soil conditions and the fertilizer and whatever, eventually they're going to have a pest question. And so they will contact their area IPM advisor or come to our website to find that information.
Oh, very good.
My group, the Urban and Community Group, we train the UC Master Gardeners on IPM, and we give them all kinds of this information, and because they're the ones talking to the residents,
So what is a Master Gardener?
They are certified by the university as specially trained to answer questions from the general public. So they go through a 15 to 18 week training where they get weekly training by various experts on tree care and proper pruning and pests and pesticides. That's my role. They get weed identification training and entomology, plant pathology, soil, how to be a volunteer, and then they volunteer their time to answer questions on
In
the
the
phone,
community?
go out to the community, do farmers market booths, and so they are a resource in the local community.
I imagine that's something the MS4s can tap into too, because that could be part of their outreach program to get these individuals either identify who they already are or encourage others to become master gardeners.
Yeah, certainly. So the master gardeners generally talk to residential audiences, less to sort of professionals. But you know, they are part of our system, and so they can hook someone up to somebody who's a better resource for whatever that need is. So that's how I came to be, is you or someone called the San Joaquin office, and he contacted me. So we're all very connected, and we're here as public service.
Any other questions? I know we got several public works people here. Maybe how would you do this? Now's your chance. You got the expert here. Any other questions? Well, there's a great resources you saw there. Yeah, another one? Yeah. Go ahead.
Just following up on my last question.
Sure.
When you did training with BASMA, did they end up hiring, do you know, additional people to do this work, or it sounds like they have dedicated people to do outreach?
Yeah. So the group that BASMA it was a Department of Pesticide Regulation grant to train 10 what are called IPM advocates. They're consultants. So BASMA oversees a program that disseminates information mostly in the Bay Area, but they do come to the Sacramento and a little bit south to Fresno and San Luis Obispo. So it's called Our Water, Our World, and so they distribute fact sheets that are sort of based on some of our information, but they're kind of Bay Area specific. So BASMA oversees the program, and the advocates are working with retail stores through local stormwater agency contracts, and they have to submit all these reports. So what UCIPM does is we train them, and I give them continuing education, and we send them, we have newsletters that we print for them and they distribute to the stores. And so we're trying to magnify our efforts by using them. We're trying to train a new cohort here soon, and looking for funding to do that. But right now it's only in Northern California. But you know, they could be a partner in some of your efforts, especially since they are funded by stormwater agencies. So they have a certain niche there. Yeah. But I don't know if there's an advocate that covers this area. I think there may not be. Yeah. But I can find out.
Well, we certainly have heard of Our Water, Our World. That name has come up several times in the MS4 world, and especially in the phase 2, dealing with education outreach. And it was a program that State Water Board pointed to as saying definitely worth emulating.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Karey, thank you. This has been very informative. I think I'm walking away knowing a lot more about pesticides and also alternatives. So thank you very much for being a part of
very welcome.
Stormwater Awareness Week.
You.
And thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, they can get a hold of you through your website.
Yes, and I can, I think I ran out of business cards, but you have my contact information.
So,
so
thank you for coming.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.